More than 380 elite soldiers, 24 armored vehicles, and tons of explosives. Their mission? A secret landing designed to flank Ukraine's southern defenses. No satellites had spotted them. No radars had tracked them. Every move was timed, every route planned.
Russia thought it had the perfect plan for victory, a lightning strike meant to crush Ukraine and impress the world. But instead of surrendering, Ukraine stood firm with courage and determination, turning Russia's grand plan into a long and unexpected disaster. Today, we're diving into how Ukraine turned Russia's so-called perfect plan into a full-blown war disaster. Ukraine's fierce determination made Russia suffer repeated setbacks, and what was meant to be a short victory turned into a drawn-out disaster that changed global politics. So, Russia's plan rested heavily on shock and speed. Using overwhelming firepower, thousands of troops, and advanced weapons, Russia expected to paralyze Ukraine before it could organize a proper defense. The idea was to march into Kyiv and other major cities so quickly that resistance would collapse under pressure.
But Ukraine now had the advantage of time. And in war, timing is more lethal than firepower. A battle hadn't yet begun, but the battlefield had already shifted. And the hunters were about to become the hunted. If you were in command, would you strike now?
Yet, to the surprise of the Kremlin and much of the world, Ukrainian forces refused to give up. In city after city, they held their ground, preventing Russia from capturing crucial locations like Kyiv, Kharkiv, and Mariupol. This immediate resistance ruined Russia's timetable and revealed cracks in its supposedly perfect strategy. One of Russia's biggest mistakes was underestimating Ukrainian unity and morale. Russian leaders assumed that large sections of Ukraine's population, especially in the east, would welcome their troops, or at least remain passive. What happened was the opposite. Ukrainians, regardless of region, rallied around their government and army. Civilians helped in countless ways, from joining territorial defense units to passing intelligence to soldiers or providing food and shelter. This sense of national unity transformed the invasion from what Russia thought would be a quick takeover into a long, grinding fight. Ukraine's defense was also boosted by crucial Western support. Within weeks of the invasion, the United States and European allies began supplying Ukraine with modern weapons, drones, and real-time intelligence. Anti-tank missiles, portable air defense systems, and advanced drones allowed Ukraine to ambush Russian convoys, destroy armored vehicles, and defend its skies. This support, combined with Ukraine's creative tactics, made a huge difference. The world watched as Russian tanks and aircraft were destroyed in large numbers, shocking military analysts who had once believed Russia's army was unbeatable. Meanwhile, Russian troops struggled with their problems. Reports soon emerged of soldiers running out of food, fuel, and even basic medical supplies. Many units consisted of poorly trained conscripts who lacked both the will and preparation to fight effectively. Confusion within the chain of command made matters worse, as some units operated without clear orders or proper coordination. These weaknesses slowed down Russian advances and made them vulnerable to Ukrainian counterattacks. As weeks turned into months, Ukraine began pushing back. Its counteroffensives reclaimed key areas in Kharkiv and later in Kherson. These victories demonstrated not only Ukraine's adaptability, but also Russia's inability to hold on to territory without suffering heavy losses. The war had shifted from Russia's attempt at a blitzkrieg into a war of attrition, one that Russia was ill-prepared to sustain.
Ukraine had drawn a line, not on a map, but in time. Please support us by liking and subscribing to our channel. The real firestorm is about to begin. Don't blink. At 04:42 a.m., the Russian convoy entered the designated kill zone.
On the international stage, Russia faced consequences it had not expected. The West imposed sweeping economic sanctions, targeting banks, energy exports, and Russian elites close to Vladimir Putin. These measures cut Russia off from vital technologies and financial systems, weakening its economy and straining its ability to keep fighting. At the same time, Ukraine received global sympathy, humanitarian aid, and financial support. Far from isolating Kyiv, Russia's invasion had made it a symbol of resistance against aggression. The battle also played out in the information space. Ukraine skillfully used social media and global media coverage to highlight Russian atrocities and battlefield failures. Images of destroyed Russian tanks, captured soldiers, and ruined cities spread quickly online. Zelensky's daily video addresses inspired his people and reassured international supporters. This constant stream of evidence of destruction, civilian suffering, and resistance efforts won Ukraine worldwide admiration while undermining Russia's propaganda. Also, Russia's attempts to control the narrative crumbled as its losses mounted, leaving the Kremlin struggling to maintain domestic support for the war.
The PD-2 reconnaissance drone used in the Black Sea operation was worth only $30,000. It didn't fire a missile. It wasn't fast. It didn't even carry a weapon. But its value lay in what it saw.
The war also exposed weaknesses in Russia's highly praised military modernization. Over the years, Russia has invested billions into upgrading its armed forces, showcasing new weapons and technology. But on the battlefield, these investments proved far less effective than expected. Its poor coordination, outdated tactics, and an inability to adapt revealed that Russia's military was not as modern or efficient as it claimed. The supposed edge it held over Ukraine was blunted by mismanagement and rigid planning.
No acknowledgement of the loss. The Russian Ministry of Defense remained silent. Its evening briefing made no mention of the amphibious group. Russian state media shifted focus to unrelated naval exercises in the Arctic, even as dozens of independent tracking accounts showed a complete signal blackout from the amphibious fleet.
Another unexpected outcome was the renewed strength of NATO and the European Union. Putin had counted on division among Western powers, but instead, the invasion unified them. NATO countries coordinated unprecedented military aid deliveries, while the EU rallied around sanctions and diplomatic pressure. The alliance even grew stronger, with new members applying to join, directly undermining one of Russia's long-term goals of weakening NATO influence in Europe. Inside Russia, the prolonged conflict began to create cracks. There were many casualties, reports of retreats spread, and reshuffles among military leaders hinted at chaos within the Kremlin. Families of soldiers demanded answers, dissent slowly grew, and the economic hardships caused by sanctions worsened daily life. What was meant to be a quick war became a long drain on Russian society, exposing the limits of Moscow's control. Ukraine, on the other hand, not only survived but grew stronger. Its government continued to function, its institutions held together, and its leaders, especially President Volodymyr Zelensky, became symbols of defiance worldwide. The Ukrainian state, which Russia had expected to collapse within days, instead became more unified and determined. This resilience deepened Ukraine's identity as a sovereign nation and strengthened its democratic resolve.
Their so-called radar blind spot had been decoded, not neutralized. Ukraine hadn't jammed it. They had learned to see through it. The PD-2 drone's use of thermal layering and loitering altitude had outmaneuvered Russian counter-recon algorithms.
Also, geography played a decisive role in Russia's failures. Ukraine's vast lands, diverse terrain, and large cities provided natural advantages for defenders. Urban warfare, in particular, gave Ukrainian forces opportunities to ambush and exhaust Russian troops, making quick advances impossible. Russian forces were not prepared for prolonged battles in densely populated cities, which turned into traps, costing them equipment and manpower. Beyond the battlefield, the human cost of the war became undeniable. Millions of Ukrainians were forced from their homes, either as refugees abroad or displaced within the country. Entire cities were entirely ruined, and countless civilians were killed. Instead of achieving legitimacy or influence, Russia became associated with destruction and suffering. This deepened its global isolation and further branded the war as a disaster of its own making.
The sea was quiet again, but the message was loud. This war would not be won by brute force. It would be won by vision, velocity, and the kind of thinking that turns $30,000 into a strategic earthquake.
At the geopolitical level, Russia's setbacks reshaped the balance of power and altered the world order in ways few had anticipated. NATO, an alliance that had often been criticized as outdated or fractured, suddenly found itself revitalized with a renewed sense of purpose. the invasion reminded Europe and North America of the importance of collective security, leading to greater military spending, tighter coordination, and even the historic decisions of Sweden and Finland to seek NATO membership. For Russia, this was a severe strategic blow, as one of its primary aims had been to weaken the alliance, not expand it. Meanwhile, European countries began urgently rethinking their decades-long dependence on Russian oil and gas. For years, Russia had wielded energy supplies as a political weapon, but the war pushed Europe to diversify. Investments in renewable energy increased, new trade agreements were forged with Middle Eastern and American suppliers, and infrastructure projects, such as liquefied natural gas terminals, were accelerated. The shift reduced Russia's leverage over Europe and simultaneously reshaped global energy markets. Beyond Europe, the ripple effects of the war reached Asia, Africa, and Latin America, where governments were forced to reassess their foreign policies. Nations that had once leaned toward Russia for military cooperation or economic partnerships began keeping their distance, wary of being entangled in Russia's growing isolation. And Russia's global soft power, which had been carefully cultivated over decades, weakened under the weight of sanctions, military failures, and reputational damage. Even Russia's most important strategic relationships grew more complicated. China, while continuing to cooperate with Russia in some areas, became increasingly cautious. China avoided offering full military support, wary of jeopardizing its own trade and diplomatic ties with the West. India, too, maintained a balancing act, continuing to buy discounted Russian oil while strengthening security cooperation with the United States and Europe. Neither China nor India wanted to be fully tied to a partner whose war appeared to be faltering. These revealed that Russia's setbacks were not confined to the battlefield, but waves across the international system. What had started as an attempt to reassert Russia's dominance in Eastern Europe ended up undermining its influence across continents. Instead of reshaping the global order in its favor, Russia found itself increasingly isolated, with fewer allies, diminished leverage, and an uncertain role in a world that was adapting to its decline. As the war dragged on, its economic impact began to spread far beyond the borders of Ukraine and Russia, shaking the foundations of global markets. Energy prices surged to record highs as European countries scrambled to reduce their dependence on Russian oil and gas, while consumers across the world faced skyrocketing costs for heating, electricity, and fuel. The disruption of Ukraine's grain exports, which supply large portions of Africa and the Middle East, triggered food shortages and rising prices in some of the world's most vulnerable regions. This strain not only intensified humanitarian crises abroad, but also raised fears of political instability in countries that rely heavily on affordable food imports. Inflation, already a concern in many economies, rose sharply, forcing central banks to tighten monetary policies and pushing millions of households into financial hardship. These ripple effects underscored how a conflict that initially seemed like a regional struggle between two countries carried profound and lasting consequences for the entire world. Ukraine's ability to hold its ground not only reshaped European security, but also reminded global leaders that stability in Eastern Europe is inseparably tied to the health of the interconnected global economy. In addition, Ukraine's resilience, Western unity, Russian weaknesses, and the broader global response combined to turn an expected quick conquest into a prolonged disaster. The invasion has reshaped Europe's security landscape, exposed the flaws in Russia's military system, and demonstrated the power of national unity in the face of aggression. Also, the Kremlin underestimated the will of the Ukrainian people, misread Western resolve, and overestimated its capabilities. What was meant to be a showcase of Russian strength became an illustration of its vulnerabilities. Ukraine, against all odds, turned what Russia thought was a guaranteed victory into one of the most defining military failures of the 21st century. Russia expected an easy win, but Ukraine turned their perfect plan into a disaster that shocked the world. Let us know your thoughts in the comments, and don't forget to like and share.